but after a few enquiries, he discovered that it would give him a new start in life, helping him live elsewhere happily. At that time, a flat became available for him to move into in my neighborhood. I used my influence while employed by the state government and Melbourne City Council. When I began working with them, John Kerner was Premier. When my position was scrapped due to changes to the political system after the elections, it forced me to remain only with my other occupation as a lecturer, which provided more time for me to spend with my children. I was happy to have helped Reg with his new accommodation, and he started making new friends, while his other friends, such as a Baptist minister and Hispanic friend Martin, who later passed on with liver-related complications, often visited him. He soon became friends with John, who was also an Englishman and lover of cats. John used to spend a lot of time with his other friend Andrew from Britain at his shop in Prague called Red Star, and I believe he had a shop in Moscow as well. He was convinced that communism was still alive in former Soviet Russia, although saddened about the ending of their supreme rule, as he regarded it. They regularly had musical evenings at John's, listening to classics with a group of other friends, and Reg was invited to spend some time with them. John was extremely proud of his electrostatic speakers. Later I joined a choir with Reg, singing classics and practicing with the Victorian Liedertafel at Melba Hall in the city. There were times I used to invite Magda to join the audience during our practices and come to the venues where we used to perform for a variety of occasions, some of which were broadcast over ABC radio. However, Reg's health was not perfect. He suffered from angina pectoris and was on heart medication. He was frightened of any operations. His health deteriorated, his family situation not being ideal, and was depressed, missing his children badly. In fact, his entire lounge was decorated with their pictures. He was obese, smoked heavily, and drank extremely strong espresso coffee like water. At one time, he was auditioned for a position to sing basso arias, but there was no particular requirement within the current shows available for a while. At the time, there was an Australian lady who resided in London and was involved in show business and visited Reg with great interest whenever she was in Australia. I believe she wanted to help him in many ways, including his possible involvement in opera. One wished that things would be a lot better for him. I had once obtained a couple of additional speakers and decided to give them to him, along with a hi-fi amplifier I had built as a hobby, and helped him obtain a few interesting items on which he could record and enjoy his beloved classical music. He now had a record player, a number of records, and a reel-to-reel Sony tape recorder. He was happy to be able to use them, and a color television made the home a home for him. He adored yesteryear's performers, and his favorite alto soprano was Kathleen Ferrier. When visiting him, one could often find him talking to his brother, Alan, in England, over his speakerphone, a new technology he immensely enjoyed using. Whenever we had special occasions like birthday celebrations, we used to invite our older friends as well as Reg. This was also a time when the girls were beginning to go regularly with their mother during her access. They did so very reluctantly, for Magda preferred them to spend more time with Jehovah's Witnesses, thus causing trauma within their psychological makeup, for ideally they needed to spend more time with their mother, and not with her faithful brothers. Obviously, their mother was willing to give them an opportunity of great importance to accept the ways of the witnesses by persistently subjecting them to their teachings. Within their circle, she was considered a good mother, disciplining her children according to the rules set by their organization. But in truth, she was a fanatically dedicated witness. The girls often told me that they did not want to sit down for long hours listening to Bible lessons, preferring to have fun. In actuality, misleading me in regard to the truth of the matter. It was clearly evident that they were trying to please both parties. In fact, when their mother had the very first access to the girls, she immediately took them to a Jehovah's Witness meeting. I also believe that they have thoroughly enjoyed it. However, when they were home, Annette shed crocodile tears and complained about the Jehovah's Witness meeting her mother had taken them to, and her silly friends, as she called them, while Birgit pretended to cry. They did not realize that I was recording their expressions on reel-to-reel tape. They were very happy, going where their mother had taken them, but pretending to be upset. Were they coached to do that? For the record, I took a copy of the tape to my solicitor. I was supposed to commiserate with their disappointment and believe that they were happy staying with their dad. That alone showed me where their real leanings were. In fact, years later, Birgit proved my suspicions to be correct, supportive of her mother because she was a Jehovah's Witness. Peculiarly, however, she always criticized me of being hateful whenever I made an observation in regard to the witnesses, without listening to what I was saying. But I was not condemning anything or anybody. Magda often told me that we were so different and not in agreement with each other in anything anymore, so she had to reject everything I attempted to teach our children, because I was the rejected of Jehovah. She claimed it to be in opposition to God's teachings, and therefore we could never live together. Let us not forget that all Jehovah's Witnesses were against me after my disfellowshipment, and were accusing me with all kinds of evil to separate us. On the other hand, they taught their Bible students that what God had put together should no man put asunder. I know I have repeated this several times before, but still question their artificiality they constantly display. However, I still wonder what the girls had been told, and what they were telling their mother about me. Obviously, they were trying to please their mother under all circumstances. And Birgit was telling Magda a lot of made-up or imagined things about me, knowing that her mother believed everything she said. When I was alone, I loved to increase the volume of my sound system, for I enjoyed music at its natural level. However, the neighbor below my unit complained, making me feel a little embarrassed about it. One time, this lady of Hungarian background came to my door asking me to turn my music down a little, but at the same time exclaimed that she believed I was inviting her upstairs. She said her husband would be very jealous if he discovered where she was, and would probably kill me. Then she asked if I was of a gypsy background, and before I could even answer her, she put her wet lips on mine. rubbing her body against my legs and chest very meaningfully. I was in shock and wished the nightmare would soon end. While squeezing her lips tightly and her tongue twirling around my beard, she said her husband was arriving and she was going to come back to sleep in my bed, and left. I could not wait until I had a shower and went to Regis and the shopping precinct for a strong cup of coffee with him. I wondered whether it was a Hungarian way of living for women to show uninvited affection to men, because during our wedding celebrations Magda's mother showed similar closeness and was quite disillusioned, telling me that I obviously preferred her daughter's kisses. How would Magda react to her mother's attempts? But I know she would choose not to believe me, for she was conditioned to think that unbelievers like me would only tell lies, as it was with their master, the devil. People who followed Jehovah had to be the only ones accepted of God and were forever righteous, whereas others not believing in their God had to be approved of only by the devil. Magda believed her daughter Birgit, who was feeding her with multiple untruths, and was convinced that her lies were the reality. From then on, whenever I was home and that lady came to my door, I pretended I was not in. There were those in the neighborhood who knew her behavior patterns and suggested I should scratch her itch, but I was not going to oblige. There was also a certain gentleman desirous to start an unusual friendship with me. He had seen me several times on television and had a homosexual crush on me, assuming artistic people were inclined that way. When he first contacted me, he never made such advances, but told me he lived with his mother and was living a life of loneliness, thus making me feel he was asking for my help as a psychologist to find a companion for him. But when he discovered that I was a single father looking after my 2 daughters, he felt hopeful. During a visit, he brought multicolored popcorns for the children. I offered him some Turkish coffee, and as he settled in the chair, told me all about his shyness and how he could not find a man to love and be loved, as many of them were terribly rough. He said I was a very gentle person and would love to live with me, and was prepared to become a mother to my children. Otherwise, he was contemplating on ending his life. I had to explain my position and my choices, but he still remained very insistent. Following this unwelcome occasion, I pretended I was never home whenever he came to visit, and did so until I moved. I did not desire to hurt anyone. However, they also needed to respect my desires and way of living. I was not interested in forming any relationship with anyone. I hope Douglas found his match and is happy. I was very surprised how I attracted all kinds of people to my personal space, especially being totally uninterested in their dreamt-of relationships. There was a young, tall, blonde gentleman of artistic background driving a beautiful red sports car. One evening he came to my door completely drunk. He did not appear to be a violent person, and begged me to let him in, although I did not know him. It took a lot of courage for me to accept such an uninvited guest. The very first thought passing through my mind was that I had to make sure he had no habit-forming substances or weapons, and I had to know what his intentions were. When I was satisfied, I invited him in. He was very drunk, but in control. He cried a little, and told me he wanted to end his life. I wondered why I had to deal with people's problems like this. If he needed professional help, I could direct him to a practicing psychologist. I offered him cups of coffee and small snacks I had prepared the day before. It felt that my job was continuing while I was psychoanalyzing that young man as he tried to explain his traumas and fears. He was single and living in the neighborhood with his father. Nearly 2 hours later, he was a little calmer and thanked me for being so kind, telling me that I had stopped him from committing something drastic in his car. When a little more sober and more time had passed, it made me worry, for I did not want a stranger sleeping at my place, as it would create a bad shock for the children when they woke up. Besides, I was virtually living on the edge anyway, with my own delicate circumstances. Apparently, he had been watching me for a while when coming home or going to places. He said he was thinking of getting to know me better, for he thought I must be a real gentleman. In the end, I decided to walk him to his home, which was close to where I lived. He preferred to walk on his own a little later and wanted to pick up his car the next morning. But, he said, first I want to surprise you, and put his mouth upon mine, forcing me to push him away. That was certainly an uninvited surprise, and as far as I was concerned, unwanted. He looked at me in amazement, almost to ask why I did not let him kiss me, forcing me to explain that it was not my way of living, and my friendship did not include anything he might have hoped for. Besides, I did not know him. When he left, he thanked me again for helping him, asking if he could come back to see me when sober. However, I was not going to allow any further friendship after the uninvited advances I had experienced that night, and so felt the need to again pretend that I was not home whenever he came visiting me. From then on, I developed a mild phobia when someone knocked at my door, and was therefore extremely happy when I moved out. I suppose there were people seeking happiness in their own way, and I happened to be the person they dreamt about. Life certainly had very interesting surprises. Throughout the years, I had to learn more about tolerance and acceptance towards people, with all their interests and backgrounds. However, I also had my own problems to deal with. My interests were different, and always had to be in control with my health as a single parent. I was primarily responsible for my beloved children, but without denying my own simple needs. I always prefer to help people, but there is a limit to what I can do as a human being. When other people's interests invade my space unnecessarily, I cannot tolerate such intrusions. Alas, I seem to attract all sorts almost magnetically, forcing me to be extremely discerning. As the girls advanced with their education, they took part in special school activities and performances. Often I videoed their activities for future reference, whilst other children from the neighborhood frequented our home on Sunday mornings. Repeating my words, I broadcast their exquisite performances, singing, telling jokes and stories on FM band, using the equipment I had partially built. Unfortunately, when Magda came for her access to the girls, especially during their Sunday morning fun, both Annette and Birgit displayed a great fear against their mother, either wanting to keep completely quiet or simply refusing to open the door. Magda, however, could never see that she was seen as a hindrance, for she specifically chose their fun time, turning up much earlier than agreed, although the program was not more than an hour and a half. For somebody who preached that respect must be earned. She never respected others, unless they were her so-called brothers. Sometimes I did not hear the doorbell, wondering when she would come to pick the girls up. Besides, I was wearing my headphones while monitoring the program. Long after their friends had gone home, the girls would come to my study and tell me that their mother, who they used to call that terrible woman, had come to the door, and they just kept quiet and did not open it. That really worried me, for I could be considered as if not following the court's orders, and their mother could claim that I deliberately kept them away. However, that was not so, for after coming all the way to pick her daughters up and not being able to do so was ugly, and nobody deserved such treatment, although she did not treat me any differently. I heard a saying once which declared, "Children can be very cruel," but they needed the company of their mother, who bore them. On the other hand, she never wanted to let Claude come near me under any circumstances, and when she had to allow to have access to him, it was under extreme duress. Although intolerable, their mother never wanted to listen to my side of the story, for listening to someone who was shunned would apparently be considered as disobedience to Jehovah's law and ultimately lead to disfellowshipment. Nonetheless, I did not want to end up with an undesirable legal issue in regard to the court's decision. Whenever I attempted to call their mother to clarify matters, she would never talk to me, for she considered me as the evil, just like the rest of Jehovah's Witnesses. Apparently they did not regard what they were doing as judging and condemning me. It is not my place to judge anyone, any religious order, belief system, or cultist movement. Therefore I shall remain an observer. Any kind of fanaticism is harmful to human lives, and we have seen the effects of it throughout man's long and arduous history, from east to west, everywhere around the world. Similarly, the Jehovah's Witness movement, although a reasonably recent establishment originating in the States as discovered within the history of world's myths, faiths, and cults, is regarded as a Christian religion by its promoters. To start with, the word Jehovah is enormously purported to be one of the Old Testament names for God. He was promoted as the God of olden Hebrew nations. During the post-Moses period, and following several prophets, such as Samuel, Yahweh, take note that out of absolute respect, Jews never pronounce his name and never utter the word represented as JHVH, was worshipped as the universal creator. He was the father of all humanity. He was the source of all righteousness. Some believe the meaning of this name is more significant, therefore unknowable. Others claim that it stands for Redeemer, and New Age circles interpret it as the first causation. In many parts of Old Testament, the name Elohim was used instead. The Jews prefer to use the term Adonai, which means the Lord. Jehovah's Witnesses consider themselves as Christians. However, as far as I'm concerned, they are far removed from principles of Christianity. They originally chose their title from the American Standard Version of the Holy Scriptures, Isaiah 43:12, where it is written, "Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and I am God." What we discover is that they are a society of ministers upholding absolute devotion to Jehovah and keeping his command to preach this good news of the kingdom without even knowing exactly who this God is. Members of this movement believe that Jehovah will destroy the wickedness under Satan's dominion during the great war of Armageddon in this last generation of humanity on earth. The last generation were the ones born during or shortly after 1914, and the absolute end was calculated as being 1975. According to their teachings, apparently one of the sons of the first man, Abel, was the very first Jehovah's Witness. Therefore, they usually quote from Hebrews 11 and 12, verse 1, to prove the validity of their claim. Their organization was started in Pennsylvania in 1870s by Charles Taze Russell, and their headquarters was incorporated in 1884 with him as president. Following presidents were Judge J. F. Rutherford and N. H. Knorr. The Society's magazine Watchtower was first published in the States in 1879 and was later translated into more languages. Their activities are conducted all over the world. Interestingly, this literature contains Masonic emblems. Unfortunately, many of their members follow strict protocols and are fanatical about their theocratic system. They have a judicial committee which watches over their members to ensure they do not swing away from their righteous pathways, and are the decision-makers about who is faithful and who is not, having the power to implement disfellowshipment of the evildoers and those who break their marriages by being unfaithful. They are currently claiming to be guided by Jehovah without being inspired. This standpoint is illogical. In reality, they desire both marital partners to follow the truth, or else they do everything in their power to break the family ties altogether. In this regard, their governing system follows similarities to the Church in the Dark Ages. Their punishment of the so-called unrighteous is subtle and very effective, and also very destructive. They seem to follow a very jealous God, thus imitating his ways in every possible way when disciplining others. Absolute devotion in complete fear is the way of living for their members. There are multitudinous examples of this with devastating results throughout their history. In reality, theirs is one of the cruelest organizations following a very cruel God. Friedrich Nietzsche says, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you."